Ladies and gents, welcome back. It's Elliot at Enginears, and we've got Shariah here today. Shariah's from Metaview, and he's ex Palantir. He's co founder of Metaview. He's going to give us a little bit of insight into conversation analytics in interviewing. Now, this is probably a topic that resonates with quite a lot of us, especially in engineering. Obviously, some affiliated topics to all of us who are listening, most likely. Nice to meet you. How you doing?
Yeah, doing great, Elliot. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So, give us a little bit of insight into Metaview and who Metaview are and where the idea came from.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, we're on a mission to make team building just as informed by insights and data as any other key business area. And of course, that is a huge mission that will take a long time to achieve. But where we are starting is by enabling organizations to get really good at interviewing. And I'll talk a bit more about kind of where the idea came from and how we kind of validated it, etc. But the fundamental problem when it comes to interviewing is that over time, your interviewing population and the quality of your interviewing population declines. Because ordinarily what happens is that initially you train people and you let them know what good interviews look like and what you should do. And then they're left on their own. And then for the rest of the lifetime of their interviewing kind of career, they just continue interviewing and therefore each person develops their own bad habits. Each person's way of assessing or attracting a candidate diverges from everyone else in the organization. And what happens over time is the quality of the system as a whole drastically drops. It becomes very inconsistent. The rigor becomes very different amongst different interviewers. And ultimately, people start looking for different things in candidates.
Mm.
So when you then sit in a roundtable and someone says, I don't think we should move forward because this candidate is low grit, it is very hard to understand what that even means. And even if you knew what that meant, it's very hard to know what that person means because they haven't been calibrated for everyone else in over a year. So that's where we're starting, and that's what we're trying to solve. We're trying to help companies get really good at interviewing by consistently getting feedback from our product, and that's what our product does. It provides companies feedback. It provides interviewers with feedback on their interviews. So we don't focus on the candidates. We don't assess the candidates or anything like that. We're focused on
Oh wow.
interviewers and helping interviewers become excellent at interviewing. That's what we do. But yeah, happy to talk a bit more about the genesis of it as well, if you think that's a good direction to go. Otherwise, we can talk about other things.
Yeah, I'd love to understand that. I'd really love to understand that. People are pretty complex, and you've obviously
Mhm.
got quite a good understanding and insights into that. So help me understand or help us understand the genesis.
Yeah, look, the foundation of where we saw this problem, as you mentioned, prior to starting Metaview, now it's now been over 3 years. But prior to that, I used to work at a company called Palantir, where I did a lot of tech leading in, especially within their European ecosystem. Of course, a big part of that is just the usual product and engineering responsibilities that you expect a tech leads to have, but a large portion of it was also hiring and building teams.
Mm,
Very similar kind of theme as well for our other co-founder, Sile, who used to lead one of Uber's products in Amsterdam, which is where the European headquarters is.
yeah.
You know, a lot of his responsibilities were around making the product happen, essentially. But of course, as leadership within these companies, you're also spending a lot of your time building teams. And the thing that kind of is very cliche these days, and everyone agrees on it, is that hiring decisions are the most important decisions you make. You know, no one argues about that because it's obvious that success or failure of any organization is a function of the people in that organization. So it's obvious that the hiring decisions are so important. The thing that we realized, having been so involved in that machine was that interviews are the most outcome defining part of this process because it's where you're learning the most about the candidates, but it's also where the candidates are learning the most about you, which is
Hmm.
something people often forget. It's not all about assessing candidates, it's also about attracting candidates, especially within particular cohorts. Candidates have a lot of options. So like why should they come work at Metaview or at Palantir or at Google, right?
Spot on.
Um, and coming from the product and engineering world, where for a long time we've had very good observability and telemetry into our systems,
Hmm.
and we make decisions that fundamentally require human judgment but are very data informed. It is very foreign when you look at these some of the most important activities, which are these interviews, and how
Yeah.
opaque they are. No data is coming out of them, there's no telemetry, there's no observability, and therefore how could you possibly improve this process if you don't know what's happening within it at scale across your organization in aggregate? And I can give you a hypothetical example. Let's say we're company whatever, Pied Piper, and we are just opening an office in a particular region in Europe, and we are really struggling to make candidates accept our offers. We're giving out offers, but they are not accepting these offers. They're rejecting our offers. As a recruitment team, what are my options in diagnosing this problem? The options are very limited. You have to make a bunch of guesses, basically. Me as a person, one of the questions that I would have is I'd love to know what are these candidates asking in the interviews? What are the most common questions they're asking? And the answer to that question in most organizations today is shrug. I have no idea what they're asking. Let's ask a few interviewers. In organizations that use Metaview, the answer is let's open Metaview and look at all the data that we have. Let's break it down and only filter to the candidates that are in this particular region of Europe where we're opening our new office. And let's put all the candidate questions in particular group them by themes and see what the themes are. And while we're doing that, let's also do the same thing for the rest of the world, every other office that we have, and compare these two and see how they differ. And
Okay.
that, and that's kind of where it starts to get very interesting. And that was really the genesis of Metaview. So we saw that these interviews were just so outcome defining, yet completely opaque. And of course, as you know, there are metrics and things in other parts of the hiring pipeline, in our opinion, not the most important part of it. And that's what gave birth to Metaview.
Can you help us break down some more of those conversation analytics? Because I think that's a really interesting point that you make. What questions are people asking our interviewers in the interview? But what other analytics are you looking at that make up the MetaView platform?
Yeah, we look at a variety of different things. I won't go through all of them, but I'll
Okay.
give you some flavors. Who is speaking when and for how long? How fast are people speaking? Are there interruptions happening? When are they happening? Who's interrupting who? When we talk about questions, how many questions are being asked? Assessment questions. What types of questions are being asked? Of course, there's so many different types of questions: closed, open, behavioral, hypothetical. In a like a coding interview, you might be hinting, and that's almost a type of question. Um, uh, so those things, and you can take a whole bunch of these metrics, and there's other ones as well, even like very very subtle ones, like the number of filler words that someone is using, or the level of hostility in their language, and stuff like that. Um,
Mm.
you can then take these, and there are many other supporting data that organizations already have that will help you slice and dice your interviews based on these metrics. So, for example, you can start to say, hey, I want to look at all our hiring manager interviews that are male interviewers. And I want to understand more about the complexion of the conversation when they're interviewing male candidates versus female candidates. How
Mm.
much are they talking in these two different scenarios? How much are they interrupting? And of course, as you would expect, in that particular example, there are huge differences. Where, for example, when a male interviewer is interviewing a female candidate, they ask a lot more questions, but also they speak a lot more. So not only are you trying to be a more rigorous interviewer by asking a lot of questions, you're also giving the candidate far less time to actually shine.
Yeah.
Um, that on its own doesn't really isn't like sufficient to make any action. But the point is, there are now these jumping off points for further inquiry into how are we doing our interviews. So that's that's like directionally what we do.
There's some good points, and I'm reflecting on probably my most recent interviews and
Mhm.
thinking, oh, okay, and assessing my own performance. Interesting. So I'm keen to touch on the point where you're mentioning Sile the genesis of Metaview. You've obviously spoken about your experience, so let's try and tie it together. So help us understand. You're in that infancy stage. How do you actually start to define the product and the architecture for this? Help us
Yeah.
understand those two components. Touch on the architecture part because I think that's going to be particularly interesting.
That's an interesting question. There's a couple of things worth kind of being aware of. We are product people, obsessed with our customers. The thing that matters to us are our customers. The reason the company exists, obviously, any company exists, are the customers. And therefore, when we make an architectural decision or an engineering decision, it does not happen in isolation because of just the engineering problem. It happens a lot of the context around why this is the best thing for our customers is also important. And so, really, in the beginning, the way we started out was, look, we have certain things we want to test to see whether they work well for our customers or not. And so, how can we ensure we are spending ultimately our most valuable resource, which is time, as close to 100% of it on our core competencies, on things that are going to be highly valuable to our customers and de-risk our business. And so, when thinking about it from that lens, our architectural decision end up going down the what is now called the serverless ecosystem, which
Yep.
is fundamentally you pay for what you use, and the management or DevOps overhead or requirements are very different to the traditional kind of infrastructure. And that serverless ecosystem really allows you to focus on your core competencies, are the things that are going to make your company great and de-risk important factors for your company, and not spend time on everything else that every other company also needs to spend time on, like making sure your servers are up and making sure the quality of them are improving over time and stuff like that. Well, we essentially, as do most companies these days, have tens of thousands of engineers on AWS worrying about most of our problems. So we don't
Yeah.
have to, and we can focus on our basically like customer logic. And that was
Yep.
one of the things that we did very early on, very deliberately, somewhat controversially at the time compared to the rest of the industry. But for us, the decision making process is very easy. It is this will allow us to spend the most amount of time on customer problems and not on like making sure internally we're like have this server up or whatever.
So okay, so was it controversial more from a reliability aspect?
I think it was controversial in that a lot of people at the time would have thought the serverless movement feels a bit like a fad,
Okay.
and it had a lot of unknowns. And of course, it has a lot of downsides as well. It has upsides, it has downsides, like everything else. But again, I think once you have the context for your business and the what is most valuable for your customers, the decision making process actually is actually not very difficult, and it's just like such an obviously good use of technology for us. Like when we first started, there was speed and latency concerns with serverless,
Yeah.
which to this date they are much better, but the concerns are still there. But it is a bunch of trade-offs. I think we are actually fine with having higher latency, but being able to spend 60% more engineering resources on core business problems as opposed to like making sure the really really fast servers that we have are up and running in the way that we don't have to worry about today.
Going back a few years, would
Yeah.
you change anything about the design or decisions that you made from a tech perspective? Doesn't sound like you would. I don't know, but hit me with it.
Yeah, no, I think broadly speaking, we would make the same decisions over again. I think the interesting thing that has now happened in hindsight is, as I said, as you know, there are positives and negatives to every decision that you make. And I think it's just that over the past 3 years, as the ecosystem has grown with us, the positives and negatives of this decision are just now a lot more obvious, a lot more well documented. People speak it.
Yeah.
There's a lot more content around it, and therefore the discourse is helpful in mitigating for especially the weaknesses. These were some of the stuff that 3 years ago didn't really exist,
Yeah.
and so perhaps some of the lessons we had to learn ourselves, maybe the hard way, especially around like observability and monitoring of a serverless environment and how that's different to like traditional architectures.
Yeah.
But the fundamental decision, I'm very confident we wouldn't have changed that. And even if we were to make the decision again today, we would still do that because we made a great deal of progress in our company's
Okay.
history with only 3 people.
Yeah.
Um, and for anyone who looks at our product and what we've achieved, that seems like very strange that only 3 people managed to do that. That's because we had 3 people only spending time on things that matter.
Yeah.
Whereas in a lot of cases, you end up having to have 8, 9, 10, 12 people spending a lot of time on things that actually don't matter if you were to be very rigorous about your thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Smart approach. I don't want to focus too much on the tech, but I'm just genuinely
Yeah.
interested that the monitoring and observability part in a serverless environment is different to a traditional infrastructure environment. Why is that?
It's just that everything is so ephemeral that things come up, they do a certain task and they go away. And like your traditional vendors for providing observability telemetry and like alerting were just not designed with that ephemerality, if that's even a word, in mind. And around the time we started, maybe a year on, you started to see either traditional vendors were starting to catch up, or there were also new players where some, you know, pretty substantial companies who were focused and are still focused specifically on like serverless observability, serverless monitoring, which yeah, it's awesome, and I guess it's expected as part of any new ecosystem that grows. But yeah, that those were. It's just that the tooling wasn't there for a while because it was new.
Fine. Okay. Nice. And I guess 3 years, like you say, the maturation process and documentation and that learning comes with it, and I guess
Yeah.
the features and product evolve. Talk to us a little bit about being a founder in not necessarily today's market, but current times. What's your experience of being a tech founder? There's people listening that will no doubt envy you or listen to you. Envy in a sense of you've gone and executed on something extremely well. So, what have you learned, and what can you share?
I guess I don't have very specific and concise lessons to list out, so I kind of like share some things that are top of mind in real time, and then we should make sure I'm not babbling on for too long as well. But uh, there are a couple of things. One is that if you are someone who likes ambiguous, creative problems, uh, there is literally no better thing to be spending your time on than founding. But not just like randomly founding. You know, if you founding something that you deeply care about, is a problem that you've dealt with, and that you can imagine yourself obsessing over. And if you're lucky enough, and I think the word is luck, at least in my case, I was just lucky enough to find the problem that I cared about and get to, 7, 8 years ago or whenever it was, meet Sile. There's no one else on this planet I'd rather spend so much of my like creative time on than Sile. If you're lucky to have all that and the problem and the passion for your space and all that stuff, then it is just the most rewarding thing you can spend your time on. It is relentless. I think you can read all you want in books about it, and people saying it's difficult and it's hard and everything like that. It's a lot harder than like it sounds in books, and it's a lot more relentless than it sounds in books. But that is what is fun about it, right?
Yeah.
So I think ultimately we talk a lot about this at Metaview, and in fact it's something that Sal talks about a lot as well, which is we want to have an impact, of course, like most people do, but we also want to have fun, and not just one of the two. Just having loads of fun and having no impact, it's like a pretty useless member of society. But also having loads and loads of impact but no fun, you probably won't be too happy when you're on your deathbed. And so that is what we're doing. And I think that's like, as a founder, you can have an impact and have fun if you're in the right mindset and constantly do both of it. And when I say constantly, that's like normalized. Of course, there are times where you're not having impact and there are times where you're not having fun. But net, it is extremely rewarding experience. It's very hard. Um, and the growth that it results in, sometimes in the wrong direction, but it's still growth, is the speed of it is something that's very hard to achieve anywhere else, because you're on your own time. Yeah, right. So those are like some abstract thoughts that I have around it. There are many like little lessons and nuggety type lessons that we've learned along the way, but those aren't really the important things. The important things are, I think, the more abstract. For me, this is a very meaningful and great way to spend my life, basically. And when I speak to the peers and other
I love
founders and
that.
like early members of our the people who have joined us as well, it's the same for them, right? So um,
I love that. Share with us a little bit about some of that customer growth then, because sorry, I'm not paving over what you've just said, but there's some pretty awesome words. Share with us a little bit about that customer growth then, so listeners can understand a little bit about just how much you've scaled.
yeah, so look, we have started about, as I said, 3 years ago, in what is a completely new category. So, of course, the problem has always existed. Ultimately, the outcome, there's many companies trying to achieve the same outcome, which is ultimately make sure the right people are spending their time in the right environments, in the right companies. But this particular problem that we saw is the particular approach that we took is something that is resulting, it requires a completely new category, which is basically it started off as conversation analytics, but now it is just a lot about how do you make data informed team building decisions, right? And one of the things with a new category is that you have to grind a lot in the beginning to figure out whether, like, what's the reason that this category didn't exist until now. Chances are it's because it's pointless, or rather you're onto something exciting, but of course with that comes a lot of hard work to figure out whether it's exciting and impactful or not. A lot of it is around education of the market, education of yourself, education of your customers, etc., etc. And so really, we spent a lot of our time doing that until December 2019, January 2020, where yes, we worked with a variety of different customers, but we were very much in discovery mode, and figuring out what the market is. And around January 2020 was a big turning point for us, which is we started working on our personalized feedback product, that completely blew up as soon as we started talking about it, even before we had finished thinking about the exact execution of it. And we started working with companies like Bulb, who are extremely well known for the amazing team that they've built in Europe and how fast they've grown in Europe.
Yeah.
And we started to get a lot of interest from other companies. And of course, that's also when the pandemic started to get serious, especially in Europe. So around March, April, this is one of those like learning things, by the way, as a founder, where no book could have written about COVID and the impact of that would have. So you just have to like live through it. And there's been a lot of, you could take a lot of learnings out of it. And around March, there was so much uncertainty in the world that
Mm.
the majority of the companies stopped their hiring, as I'm sure you know as well,
Yeah.
where they thought we don't know what's going to happen, so we're just going to stop growing and give it a few months and see what happens. Obviously, that's not great news for us, but it actually like theoretically not great news, or practically it was absolutely fine news, because we said that's fine. We're going to catch up on our product and really spend these few months while everyone figures their life out. We'll figure our life out as well, and we will just build an exceptional product. And that's what we did. And by the time around September, we were coming out of it, and of course, the pandemic wasn't over and still isn't over, but there was a lot more certainty around how to plan for it for
Yeah.
other companies.
Yeah.
That traffic essentially picked back up again, and
Amazing.
we've been growing like at a incredible pace since, not just in terms of we're getting lots of customers, but we're working with next generation iconic companies. We are really really happy with the place we are now in terms of the impact we're having. And of course, off the back of that success, there are some exciting news that we'll also share in due course, not today, with folks around really the next act in our company.
Love it.
But yeah, it's been very exciting, but of course, so much left to do. Um, we haven't even started.
Love it.
So
Love it.
yeah,
Honestly, big fist pump. Where do you think, or what are you planning for? Not necessarily from a product perspective, but from a tech perspective, that could equally be as tough, to be fair, from if we don't know what we're planning for from a product point of view. But what are you thinking for in regards to tech wise, how you could evolve in the next
yeah,
2 years if the trajectory is upwards?
yeah. I think that's an interesting question. I'm going to take that and like change it slightly and say what do I think we can achieve in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years? Because I think that
Nice.
I think that is the prize,
Okay.
basically. And and I'll use an analogy. So in the autonomous driving industry, if you have a car and you put a radar sensor on it, and that sensor will tell you how far certain objects are from you as you're driving,
Yeah.
but it doesn't tell you anything else, right? So you just know that there's this thing that is like roughly 3 and a half meters away from me. So one data point on its own, somewhat revealing, but ultimately useless. You can't make good decisions on top of that.
Okay.
But of course, you have your radar, and then you add a LiDAR, and that LiDAR does a more granular job of telling you what objects are where. And it also, because it's more granular, maybe it tells you a bit more about the shape of that object.
Yeah.
So now you have your radar, it tells you there's an object 3 meters away. You have your LiDAR, it says this is roughly the shape of it. When you combine those two together, you have a much better picture, but it's still fundamentally useless. You can't make concrete decisions on top of that. And then you introduce other stuff, you introduce a camera, etc., etc. And of course, now you have LiDAR. There's an object 3 meters away. It happens to be of this shape. And from the image, it does look like a mother carrying a child. And so suddenly you have collected multiple different data points that on their own were not very useful. But when combined together, it gives you such a perfect picture of your environment that you can start to make better decisions.
Yeah.
And in this case, maybe the decision is we'll stop because the light is also red and there's a pedestrian crossing. Happy days. This is, of course, fundamentally, this problem is a sensor fusion problem. You have multiple sensors and you fuse them together to get a perfect picture of your environment. That is what we are about. The future that Metaview wants to create and is going to create is, how do we apply sensor fusion that has been used a lot in the military space years and years ago, now in consumer assistive space with autonomous vehicles, etc., but is fundamentally underutilized in the enterprise space. And so we care about building teams. We think that is the most important thing companies do.
Hmm.
How can we apply the same principles of sensor fusion, essentially, to give you the perfect picture of your team building activity? Of
Okay.
course, we're starting with interviews, but that is not the entirety of your team building activity. What happens when you get the data that comes from your interviews, from the data from your meetings, from your calendar invites, from the other exercises that candidates do, to the exit interviews that you're having, and all of these things? What happens when you put those together, you fuse them together to build the best picture of your team building activity? I think that is where going back to your question about where is the tech going, that is the outcome we're trying to achieve over the next n years. And look, we got to start small and be focused, and that's what we are. And right now, we're dead focused on interviews and making sure companies are excellent at interviews when they work with us. But ultimately, it goes back to our mission. We want to make team building just as informed by insights and data as other key business areas. And we think the best way to do that is by fusing all this data and give you the best picture of your team building activity.
I think that's pretty awesome. Pretty
Thank you.
awesome. Do we have any insight on Enginears? What that might look like, or should we just remain fairly calm and coy and see what happens once you nail the interview bit?
I think it's important to remain focused,
Okay.
to make sure we don't lose sight of the fact that we have a already Herculean problem in front of us to solve, which is let's make sure we're doing interviews really well when we're building our teams.
Yeah.
Um, and look, when I say in years, as any founder would, I want Metaview to be around in 100 years, way after me. So obviously, we're not going to have a roadmap for 100 years because that's not a good use of time. But the end almost doesn't matter, because what
Okay.
matters is this is what gets us excited. This is what we think is the most impactful way that we could spend our time. And we'll stay focused today. And it's just good to know what direction we're heading. And as long as we're roughly heading in that direction, then the end doesn't matter. Like give or take 20 years, who cares, right? The world's going to be around for a lot longer. So.
Unbelievable context in 30 minutes. I make this point quite regularly. We've got 2,000 listeners in engineering, predominantly UK, London, scattered across Europe and US. Help listeners understand what you might be looking for in N period of time. Let's just work on the basis of 0 to 6 months, right? Let's be sensible. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's going to be some team building of your own. So can you just give some context as to what you might be hiring for, particular
Yeah.
skills or particular mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said again, some big news coming soon. The point is we're at an inflection point at our company, and it's very 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 exciting times because the up and to the right is the direction we're going at the moment, and hopefully for a long time. And that means we can no longer do what we want to do and what we want to achieve in the short term with just the current team. There's literally not enough human hours in the day to do that. So we are expanding our team across multiple different facets. We're continuing to expanding our product and engineering team, and I'll talk about that a bit in a second. We are building from scratch our essentially our go-to-market team, from sales to customer success to product marketing, etc. Those are some of the things we'll spend a lot of our time on in the coming months. But going back to our product and engineering team, as I said right at the beginning, we are product people and we deeply care about our customers. And so every person that works at Metaview, on the engineering side, we have a product engineering position. We don't have a software engineering position. And a product engineer for us is a person whose stack doesn't start at the back end and end at the front end. The stack starts at the infrastructure and back end and ends at the customer. That might mean getting something into the hands of a customer. It might mean going on Slack and chatting to them and figuring out whether it's working well for them or not. And so the spectrum is huge. And there are people on this planet that are excited by this breadth of influence.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people that we would love to have be a part of our team. We already today have a team that is fantastic. Folks that are just that, product engineers, not merely software engineers. And yeah, we're as is I'm sure as are many other companies as well. We are on the lookout for exceptional people to join our team that care about the entirety of the stack and not just particular parts. We, of course, appreciate we all have our biases when it comes to the stack, and we all thrive in individual parts of it, and that's good. That results in a good level of ownership and accountability at that part of the stack. But ultimately, the opportunity as Metaview is your ability to impact a lot more than just the part that you biased. So if you're excited about that, we would love to chat. And yeah, just looking forward to all these new conversations that we're going to be having in the meantime.
Product engineers, customer focus, or as in infrastructure all the way through to the customer focus. I know you're listening, so as usual, there's going to be links and other bits and pieces below. I want to give you a virtual clap, or I hope everyone's given you a little virtual clap, Shariah. Massive well done. We're going to stay tuned for some of the news over the coming months. Okay. For everyone, there's going to be links below as to how you can go and find the guys and girls. And I just want to say a big thanks again. Let's see where we're at. And I think all the listeners could well be in a situation where Metaview impacts them at their respective companies, because I think everyone can resonate with something like this. So fingers crossed. Thanks for joining us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And you're going to put the links below. So all good. If anyone wants to directly reach out to me, S16H_ on Twitter. You can just drop me a direct message. Happy to jump on a call with anyone who's interested in learning more about what we're up to. No agenda, just getting to know folks. If it happens to be that we're a good place for each other and we can work together, then great. If not, I'll still love getting to know people and helping out. So
yeah, and as usual, likes, shares, and all that social media jazz is massively appreciated. And peace and love, everyone. Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Enginears is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Enginears.io. It's no_. We've also got a website, which is enginears.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.